Hey guys. This part 3 of What If Naruto became a samurai. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 6. Two Sides of the Same Coin. Comfortable nothingness quickly gave way to a pressure in his lungs that got more urgent as Naruto became more aware that he wasn't dead. I'm not dead? Hypoxic brain injuries often benefit, or really, require therapeutic hypothermia, Chino. This boy is lucky he had such an experience. Take note as I go through the relevant signs, observe. Throat on fire, Naruto couldn't keep the water from his stomach and lungs, and painful, racking vomiting saw what seemed like endless amounts of water rocketing from his mouth. His stomach clenched over and over, cramps like knives working him over from the inside. Hypothermia? Oh God. Naruto's stomach heaved and more water followed. The world spun and shifted on its axis as his body regained some feeling. That's pronounced hypothermia, love. I know you're only 5, but still. You must hear it and say it properly. It hurt. Hurt a lot. But warmth had returned to his insides, at least slightly. Naruto realized he could feel fire spot warming his skin. Where was he? What happened? How was he alive? Orochimaru. Okay. See, the boy quickly regains consciousness after gentle warmth is reintroduced and the water expelled from his lungs. He's not out of the woods, but he's not dead, is he, love? Nope. Lucky boy. Lucky boy. Yes indeed, yes indeed. Now why don't you go grab him some blankets from the trunk? Maybe some leftover soup from the fire? Okay. Naruto found he couldn't care less about anything aside from shivering uncontrollably in his cocoon of blankets. Blinking at the brilliant red sky, and breathing like he'd just run a marathon without stopping, Naruto lay there and tried to give a shit, but found he couldn't. He knew, objectively, that he was alive and that someone had saved him, and they definitely had a kid who was pretty young. But beyond that, did anything really matter? Hey kid! Naruto decided nothing mattered and slipped back into oblivion. When Naruto awoke again, night had fallen in total, yet the embers of the fire still glowed with strength and a fitful light that made shadows cast long dancing shapes against the winter woods. Panic gripped him as it all came rushing back, some of it at least. Where the hell was he? Naruto was being held down by something tight, strong. There was a heat emanating from the blankets that were not natural, was not. Relax, kid. You're safe. A man-shaped shadow shifted and light from the fire fell upon a relatively young man, maybe Yajimbra's age, mid-30s, with silverish hair and a silly-looking wispy goatee, dark glasses shading his eyes even though it was nighttime. A poncho of some sort was his main piece of clothing, cut with bright slashes of color. What a weirdo. You were in that river for quite a while, kiddo. Very lucky Chino found you when she did, as literally 5 more minutes, and you would have died. Kind of a miracle you're alive now, despite that. The man squatted next to him, and rearranged the blankets that had fallen in his struggle. Naruto flinched back, not even understanding why. Something wasn't right and he wasn't sure he was safe, so panic seemed appropriate. The man put his hands up. Take it easy, kid, you need to stay warm or the hypothermia won't get any better. Besides, why hurt you now after Chino begged me to save you? Something about the way he said that and the grin that used way too many teeth seemed off. Naruto took in the campsite, noting the horses and wagon and makeshift home they'd set up with tarps crisscrossed to keep the wind out, tied to trees covered in fresh drifts of snow. Clearly, they were still in the land of iron. Everything rushed into his brain, the massacre, the dead and dying. Shinobi boogeymen stalking him. They needed to leave, like yesterday. This man didn't understand what had happened. Furu. Taza. Mifune. Auron. Yajimbra. A litany of names blasted through his skull, scourging him like a flail. Dead. Dead like he would be if the Seifuku-sha caught him, or Orochimaru, or those missed ANBU. All of it flashed into and out of his head, Naruto quickly exhausting himself with how overwhelmed he was. He didn't even know if Kurama won that fight against the Seifuku-sha. If Kurama won, would that mean Naruto was safe? If he didn't, well, anybody that can win against the greatest of the walking calamities, the nine-tailed fox, wouldn't be stopped by anything in the world, and Naruto would be dead. Maybe not today, maybe not even a year from now, but at some point he'd be dead. Frankly, Naruto didn't know if he was even still useful to anyone now that he didn't contain a bijou in his stomach. Spooling out in his mind thousands of different possibilities, horrible alternate futures where he ended up dead in a ditch somewhere, cascaded through his addled mind. Naruto wasn't dead. That was thanks to this man and his daughter. Thank you. The man's smile was bright, even in the limited light. And an Ishiro kid. That little lady, he pointed at a bundle on the ground near the wagon. Only some short, tufted blonde hair poked up above the blankets bunched up around her shoulders. Is Chinoike. Shino for short. Naruto struggled to sit up against a nearby rock, and helped him up with a guiding hand and a sigh. Naruto knew he was a bad patient. Fura had always said so every time he so much as scraped his knee and started moaning to whoever would listen. Mifune just had that patient look on his face that he got whenever people complained about this or that. Old man. He must have had a 1,000-yard stare because En looked serious and quiet, settling himself cross-legged in front of the blonde Uzumaki. Waiting. How much did he tell? What did he even really know for sure? Iron Shogun was dead, that much Naruto knew. They couldn't have kept Mifune from fighting unless he was unable to do so, and Mifune's sheer presence would have turned all of that around if he'd been alive. The old man's strength was unreal. The Seifuku-sha, though, that man was on another level. So what to tell Mr. Ishiro? Naruto stared at En. And stared at this child who washed up from a river. Could Naruto trust this man? He'd saved him. Used some type of medical knowledge to keep him alive when, by all rights, he should be dead. Naruto knew that for certain. Naruto had been thoroughly impaled. He remembered the feel of the blade sliding through his ribcage, entering vital soft parts. The feel of the burning poison of some kind that had seemed to paralyze him. The cold grip of death and then gliding into the water so smoothly, light shining in bars through the open water. Honesty was important, integral to honorable comportment, something that Mifune believed was almost as important as his very life. On the other hand, how likely was it that En was an agent of the Seifuku-sha? Naruto realized he didn't have much of a choice if he needed to impress upon En the importance of leaving immediately. The man wouldn't uproot himself and his daughter without a strong enough reason. But he couldn't get anything out. His mouth worked, but nothing came out besides a croak. Everything, the enormousness of the last few hours, days, rose up inside him like a monster, and all his feelings bottlenecked and burst out of him in incoherence. The 9-year-old found himself crying, shivering, with cold snot around his mouth like a child. Stop it! Stop being a baby! This isn't how shinobi act. Some harsh voice shouted him down, that he wasn't a shinobi, couldn't be, he was broken, crippled, forever held apart from the beautiful radiance and power of chakra. But Naruto couldn't help the crying. A dam had burst and nothing would stop it up again. Everyone he cared about was probably dead. If not from Orochimaru or the Seifuku-sha, then from that demon fox's rampage. A rampage Naruto had unleashed. Naruto simply sagged, numb, staring sightlessly at the fire. Maybe Kurama killed them all. At that, his mouth quirk stuck between a smile and a snarl. And, unbeknownst to Naruto, gave a speculative if worried frown. But that fierce warmth, anger and an echo of the purity of Kurama's titanic, all-encompassing rage, ran through him, shook off some of the lingering haze of the cold, stopped his crying for the moment at least. The thought that Kurama may have butchered his enemies, torn them to shreds, gave him a disturbingly warm glow. Perhaps this was pointless? Worrying about potentially dead enemies? And patted him gingerly on the back. There, that is an entirely normal reaction to a near-death, child. Abruptly, Naruto remembered himself, and where he was and who he was with. He tried to match his breathing to a rote number system, picturing a box in his head with numbers 1 through 4 on each edge like Taza taught him. 1, 2, 3, 4. Box breaths. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 in, 4 out, counted sequentially until his head, which had felt stuffed full of wool and almost swollen, cleared a bit, and he could focus his eyes properly. The night was dark and it pressed in against him like a palpable thing, the only light a dim one coming from the half-stoked fire. An's hands fluttered, dropping from his half-hearted patting like he wasn't sure what his hands should be doing now that he wasn't bringing Naruto back to life. Naruto, clear of mind or as close as he was going to get right now, realized he couldn't be sure of an Ishiro or what his motives were, so the best way forward was to say nothing of what had happened and proceed with a simple, and therefore believable, lie. If the man even asked, that is. Naruto had trouble swallowing from the skin scraped raw in his throat, but he felt it was important to say something. He was alone in the world, now. An inventory of what he had on him still could wait until later. Thanks. N was quiet, staring off into the fire. For saving me. Thank you? The man started. A grin that didn't seem at all real found its way back onto N's face. Musing, Naruto found it a bit odd the man still had his sunglasses on when it was pitch black out. Truth be told, that was low on the list of weird things he'd seen or experienced the last few days. Had he dreamed that conversation with a woman who called him a seed? All he could recall were flashes of white bone and robes of the purest white silk. Had there been blood-red eyes, or was he confusing that with the Hokage from earlier? 3 eyes? Any medical ninja who follows the code would have done the same. I just happened to be the one here, able to assist. Naruto perked up. Ninja? An Irionin, he thought they were called? Naruto knew several samurai who specialized in Irionin techniques. Healing is one of the only ninja things that the samurai didn't frown on. That statement seemed in line with what he knew of them. And took up a long, straight stick fire darkened from repeated use, to poke and prod the embers into a new life. Despite how certain I seemed in front of my dearest Chino here, I was not at all certain you'd pull through. You, my young friend, are both stubborn of mind and strong of body to survive in there as long as you must have been. And hesitated, glasses flashing reflectively, and Naruto caught a glimpse of what must have been pinkish eyes. Maybe a trick of the light? He didn't quite know what to say to that, so he opted to say nothing. Naruto warred with himself. It was rude to just leave. It didn't seem right after the man saved him, but the longer he stayed the more danger both En and Chino would be in if someone was indeed pursuing him, which by no means had an answer. Orochimaru was definitely still out there, at the very least. This seemed a circular path of thinking that he couldn't decide on. How much time could he really afford to waste here resting? Could he even get anywhere without En and Chino's help? The boy couldn't make out any identifying landmarks besides the basic fact that En pulled him out of the Zainan River, so they could be anywhere from the mouth of it near the land of snow or towards Lake Ototo to the south, in the land of fire. Though Naruto doubted he'd have survived that long of a distance unconscious and hypothermic. There was still snow on the ground, so they couldn't be too far from iron. But perhaps he'd lost track of the month and it was snowing elsewhere? Naruto knew he should have paid more attention to his lessons on geography. But again, he doubted that assertion. On the whole of it, he couldn't be certain of anything, and that was ultimately what decided the matter for him. He wouldn't get far on his own, not weak and without a food source and no weapon, so he'd find out where En was headed and decide from there. I don't know how you ended up in a freezing river, nor where your family might be, or what you might be intending now, but you are welcome to travel with Chino and me for as long as you wish. En laughed. I could never leave a child alone in the wilderness without some help, especially after I've gone through the trouble of saving you. Naruto almost let out a relieved sigh. As much as he wanted to leave, alone, there was no way that was going to happen with no food, no water, and no knife. He was having difficulty formulating how he would ask to travel with and without going into the reason he had plunged a ridiculous height into a treacherous, freezing river without dying. How could even explain what had happened? Thanks, Mr. Ishiro. Don't mention it. Naruto shifted in his blankets, feeling the chill. I feel like all I've been doing since I woke up is thanking you. If you guys need anything, Naruto scratched his head. Expressing gratitude was hard. Naruto hated when people did him favors. It honestly felt like his whole life was one big favor. Naruto knew Mifune wasn't his real grandfather. He knew, for instance, that the old Hokage had asked Mifune to look after Naruto as a favor. Taza, Furu, Yajimbra, sure, they might have loved him in their own way. That didn't change the fact they looked after him because Mifune had told them to. The same thing with Master Auron. Apprenticeships didn't come around all that often, and Naruto knew he wasn't the greatest student in the world. He struggled to pay attention sometimes and found listening to be hard for long stretches of time, which is what fluent smithing required. He worked hard, but only on things he cared about. Naruto knew exactly what his issues were, but didn't know much about how to fix them. Budin had saved him, not because he was told to, but because it was the right thing to do. That meant Naruto owed him. I don't know what I could do to repay you for saving my life, but I'd love to do something. With a long look at the little girl sleeping soundly next to them, and sounded thoughtful as he spoke haltingly. Chino and I need no thanks really. It's been fascinating studying a boy as damaged as you are. I've been teaching her everything I know about Iryujutsu. The medical profession really needs all the skilled folk it can get, and it's never too early to start learning, I've always said. But, if you really are serious? And turned his full attention to Naruto. It was like a lighthouse that had been scanning with its lamp had alighted on a boat in distress. Naruto felt like the boat with the heat of the powerful lamp turned on him. I am serious. He cut off. It took an embarrassingly long time to process what An had said. Naruto scooted back and went cold all over, hair standing up. What? How? What do you mean, damaged? Fascinating. Truly fascinating what has happened to you, you poor thing. And had risen from his seat, looming over him, light glinting off his sunglasses. Naruto scooted back but realized he was stuck wrapped as he was in his blankets. This conversation had taken a turn that Naruto had a hard time processing. Fear had taken root inside his heart, and it made his pulse race. What did this man want with him? As I was healing you with my jutsu, I received information on the state of your body and noticed something I previously thought was impossible. That anyone could survive the kind of sheer devastation to their chakra network that you have. Naruto watched in horrified, curious fascination as Zen spread his hands out like he was trying to make a shadow puppet, two hands locked together by the thumbs and spread apart like the tendrils of a thousand arms that dwelled in the sea. He had tried to reach out to his chakra, but it slipped through his fingers, close, but his power might as well have been 1,000 miles away. Now, where he had once sensed his tenketsu as a man might have felt the muscles in his ear when wiggling it, there was a terrible sensation similar to the loss of a limb. Those phantom pains men talked about when Master Auron and he fitted fusion metal replacements for a lost limb. If Naruto understood what En was talking about, nobody was supposed to have survived what he went through. En knelt in front of Naruto, a dark shape against a darker night. If you truly want to repay me. A hand reached out. You'll let me study you. The dark shape moved quickly and Naruto moved, sensing the intention before the man moved. It wasn't enough. A hand, strong and chakra-powered, slammed against his mouth and stifled the quick scream while the other was enveloped in a green glow as it pressed against his temple. Struggling, but realizing it wouldn't be enough, Naruto watched and smiling as black shadows edged in on his vision and closed in all around. What the hell? The man saves him, takes care of him, promises he can come with them, then does this? I escape the burning ruins of my life, the death of the people I care about, and I die like this? But no one answered. Nothingness. For 8 days and nights, he counted. Naruto was awake and aware and utterly helpless, frozen in some sort of stasis. He couldn't even roll his eyes to look at his surroundings, not that there was anything to see. Pitch black, the place he'd apparently been stuffed into was a storage of some sort. Jars and boxes jostled against him while the wagon rumbled and swayed, occasionally thumping against what he could only surmise was rocky ground. Panic was a constant companion as his mind conjured all kinds of horrible endings for him. Out of the pan and straight into the fire, Naruto thought bitterly. It was incredibly difficult not to wallow in self-recrimination, thinking of the dozens of things he could have done differently had he just been less of an idiot and stupidly trusting. Though he couldn't help but think that he could be forgiven, kind of, since the guy who had just kidnapped him for who knows what perverted schemes had actually also saved his life. There was nothing he could do now but think about all the things he had done wrong. Mifune would probably have said something vaguely wise that sounded like it belonged in a motivational poster. Some form of, stop focusing on the problem and hone in on the solution. But with no chakra, no ability to break whatever it was that was holding him, Naruto could only hopelessly spin his wheels with visions of escape. Panic was a constant companion, clawing at his throat. That left. Well, it left him with waiting time. He was waiting for his moment. Naruto, on the whole, was not a patient kid. It took 10 minutes or so to bruise Shava, and every time he was squirming with irritation, Mifune would completely disregard his inability to sit in a seat for that 10 minutes without wiggling. Just constant repetitions of the worst word in the entire common language, patience. But here he was, forced to be patient. Patiently waiting for your own potential death was not something Naruto found he wanted to ever get used to, so from now on, I'll never let someone get the drop on me again, he thought fiercely. But without chakra, it was a vain hope. That led him to really think about it. His condition. Naruto knew for certain he still had chakra because people died without at least a bare minimum of the life energy remaining in their systems. He knew next to nothing besides the basics of the chakra regulatory system. Mifune hadn't considered it imperative to teach him, nor had Taza or Furu. They claimed it would be something covered in differing depths later in his training, depending, as they said, on whether he chose to truly become a samurai and take the oath, along with whatever else that entailed. There were some secrets, Taza had said, that simply couldn't be shared before the oath. Naruto also knew that Kurama had everything to do with what had happened. Maybe Kurama had been a part of him for so long that he'd grown together with him somehow? Ripping apart like that had to, well, now it made a lot more sense. It was as good a guess as he could make, not knowing much about how it had happened, what Fuin had been used, or anything of that nature. Though he still could read the Fuin, that didn't do him much good without more specifics. Come to think of it. His thoughts were cut off when light struck his now sensitive eyes. Over his shoulder, as he loomed over him, Naruto could make out twilight. Chino was probably asleep. The man picked him up like a package, transporting him to the ground. Shoulder first, he thudded into the now dirt with a grunt, but still couldn't move, forced to lie there awkwardly as Zen rolled him over. The glasses-wearing lunatic simply smiled at Naruto, helpless like a dead fish in a market waiting for the buyer. The man claimed to want to study him, and that was exactly what he did. For hours, Naruto stayed pinned like he was part of a dead bug collection as Zen probed him with chakra, attempting, he thought, to repair the links between his network and the tenketsu that allowed the expression of chakra in techniques. The only real sound was half-heard mutters about things Naruto couldn't understand. Something about how directionless chakra permeated his body. Regenerate the pathways. Almost impossible. Suddenly, Naruto could move, but only his arms. I'm giving you 2 minutes to take a piss. Naruto could only nod. Legs suddenly working, Naruto slowly walked behind a tree and relieved himself. Retightening his drawstrings, he took off as stealthily as he could, while running like Kurama was chasing him. Naruto made it only as far as a not-too-distant tree-lined slope, maybe 50 feet, before something impacted his head and everything went black. Fuck. This process, completely hidden from Chino, continued for a time that Naruto felt sure was longer than a month, but was probably more like 2 weeks. How far could we travel in 2 weeks? The length of the continent, maybe? He tried to find out where he was, but most attempts gave him a glimpse of forest or plain or desert, very little snow now. Most forests looked much like another, and if you've seen one plain, you've usually seen most of them. And never seemed to make any progress either with Naruto's chakra system. The whole thing was a weird feeling where he sometimes hoped the man really did make progress because that would mean he was a step closer to regaining his control and power. That power meant safety. Naruto gave himself even odds against N if he'd had his chakra back. Most of N's ministrations resulted in endless pain where his coils used to be. Whatever that was. Naruto just knew, and using chakra on it hurt like a son of a bitch. But he was a babe in the woods else. Thankfully the man wasn't one of those child-touching freaks Taza sometimes joked about. Naruto frowned at that. That wasn't funny at all now that he was at the mercy of a strange man. Naruto shivered, thoughts turning to literally any other topic. All he could do was think, and wasn't that hilarious and terrible? This really was Yomi. Most of his time was now spent staring at the Fuin that held him, attempting to puzzle out a method of defeating it. Futile for the most part, he did learn that opposite couplings of Fuin symbols and imbued with chakra would deactivate them. Naruto found this disappointing because he couldn't summon his chakra at all without white-hot fiery pains stabbing throughout his body like knives when he strained too far. So, no go on that front. But the longer he stayed patient, the more he realized that the man thought Naruto completely helpless, and that could be of more benefit than he had initially realized. After his first escape attempt, he tried every night thereafter with no better results. He hadn't attacked the man but simply tried to escape. On foot, with no chakra powering his legs, there was no contest. Maybe, just maybe, if he attacked instead of fleeing, the man would be caught off guard and Naruto could kill him and escape. Naruto frowned. There had been no squeamishness about his cold-blooded thought to murder the man who'd saved him, who had a cute daughter that seemed every inch an innocent, and well, beyond holding him captive and studying Naruto against his will, had fed him and treated him well. But Naruto was a prisoner, and that fact was plain and weighed against his continued well-being and survival. Was he supposed to wait until the man researched everything he wanted about Naruto? Decided he couldn't heal him, and then what? Dispose of him? Naruto wouldn't wait for that, couldn't take that risk. He had to act. It was En or him, Shinobi damned. 3 nights after he made his decision to stand and fight consequences be damned, and made an early stop, Naruto couldn't see or really hear anything stuffed in the hidden floorboard storage space inside the wagon as he'd been. So, the cessation of the motion of the vehicle was his only clue something was different. That, and a strange buzz above and beyond what he'd normally hear. The wilderness was quiet, usually. This place was not. Cramped in that terrible, confining closeness, Naruto stared up at En as he opened the back of the wagon and pried up the loose boards to reveal Naruto's unwashed pale face. En hauled on his bonds, tied around his wrists, and manhandled him into a seated position on a box of something or other. The Fuin was loosened and Naruto slowly started to be able to move. His face, first, then fingers and toes, then arms and legs. Bonds were still tight, however, and that gave him a limited amount of movement to work with. Naruto's mind raced. This was an unexpected and early opportunity to attack En in the daytime. Naruto slowed his racing thoughts. Escape was close, but he had to play his cards right. To fight against someone who had access to chakra, that was dangerous. But the man wasn't a fighter. Naruto could tell a little about him just from the way he handled himself. Stronger than he and faster too, but not a close combat specialist by any means. Naruto grinned internally, trying not to let it spread to his face. We're here, boy, and you're lucky too. I was getting a little frustrated with your deformity. No progress, what a pity. But the sight of what was over his shoulder distracted and derailed his entire plan. The man had been talking, but Naruto barely heard over the beautiful buildings lining the large square, the tree-lined walk on all sides. En Ishiro had brought them to a mansion set on a sunny, despite the solid covering of snow, tree-lined walk, seemingly made up of at least 5 stories of building towering above them like some sandstone gargoyle. An inclined ramp, gated with cold iron, lay to the right of his vision, almost at the edge of where he could see. Naruto spotted a canal blocked by railways that led past the outside of the mansion, snaking around into the distance. Massive towers, some looking like glass, speared the sky in the background. Where the hell was he? En yanked on the bonds securely fastening his wrists together, nothing on his legs to trip him, which Naruto was secretly grateful for, and pulled him towards the ramp where a man, dressed like some fancy butler, met them behind the bars, looking for all the world like he'd rather be anywhere else other than in En Ishiro's grinning presence. Arjun, I presume? En Ishiro, world's greatest arms dealer with a special And paused, considering, though it was tough to tell as he twisted away from Naruto, and had those damn sunglasses on, gift to Shintoriku, master of the gutter. The man named Arjun was unmoved and said nothing, but bowed, and Naruto almost fell as En jerked him forward to follow the butler, as he opened the gate with a wide thump of and clang of shifting iron, proceeding down the ramp after the retreating soft velvet jacket of Arjun. The blood in his legs hadn't been circulating, and there were pins and needles feelings surging all throughout. Gah! There was a mold smell that was strong as they went down, along with something heavily metallic that Naruto couldn't quite place. The quiet was eerie as well, with just the soft footsteps of the three of them to echo strangely mutely. Must be the sandstone. Naruto wondered who Shintoriku was and what the hell the gutter was and what the hell is an arms dealer. For a mad, heart-pounding terrible second Naruto thought that an Ishiro meant to sell his arms to this man. For what awful purpose he couldn't discern. What would a man do with someone's arms? Arm transplants? But no, that'd be ridiculous, right? To sell people's arms? Naruto couldn't keep quiet. Hey asshole, you aren't trying to sell my arms, are ya? I swear to God I'll beat you with them the second I get out of these ropes. Naruto snarled, and Arjun looked back at them slightly horrified and scandalized. To be fair, Naruto's voice was loud and it echoed something fierce. But En just laughed and laughed till he looked like he'd be sick with it. No, boy. An arms dealer sells weapons. That's what I do. Sometimes those weapons are people. At this, Naruto just felt more confused. He sold weapons? Sometimes people were weapons. Did this guy think that he was some kind of weapon? Well, if I still had Kurama, that would be uncomfortably close to the truth. Seifuku-sha would like this guy. What assholes. How could he possibly still think that with how crippled Naruto was? He couldn't even channel chakra through his body. Naruto had to laugh, and that had both Arjun and En look at him funny. What a joke this all was. The crippled kid was a weapon. Whatever. You're an idiot if you think I'll be worth anything. And just smiled at him like he knew something Naruto didn't. I've got good instincts, kid, and they tell me you've got something. I just hope Shin sees it too. I believe he will, and he'll pay me my usual fee for it. And ruffled Naruto's wild, straggly hair and seemed strangely affectionate. Naruto wanted to throw up. You're gonna make me some money, kid. Arjun stopped and looked back at the two of them until they both fell silent. Whatever was on the other side of the massive wooden double doors, crisscrossed with thick bands of metal, wasn't something Naruto wanted a part of, and this was the last real chance in his hands to make an escape. This mansion was in a nice area too, so that meant they were in a city of no small size, which also meant authorities and people he could convince to help him. On the off chance he didn't want to involve authorities, he could also hide pretty well in a city, he figured. But that meant he needed to escape and needed to do it now. Summoning every scrape of pissed-off fantasy rage dream he'd been cooking up for the last 2 weeks, Naruto interlocked his fingers together to form a big ball and swung the collective weight of both of his fists with every ounce of strength straight into Ishiro's nutsack. The man dropped with a squeak. Naruto started sprinting back up the way he came, heedless of the incline, heedless of the pain already starting to cramp his calves and thighs, heedless of whatever Arjun might do. Feet pounding in frayed and dirty sandals, he tried not to trip as he came to a stop at the shut gate. Fuck! Frantic, he started to look for a mechanism and realized there was a slight indentation on his left, and a switch poked out of the slit currently in the top position. Naruto pulled it, and the door started to open. Slowly. So slowly. Naruto felt his blood, his frantic heartbeat, pounding in his veins and ears. Come on, come on, come on! Pain similar to when he'd had Kurama ripped out of him burst in his veins, and he tasted blood in his mouth. All over him, inside him, his blood seemed to boil in his veins. Naruto hadn't even realized he'd fallen, or that he bit his tongue screaming, or that he was screaming at all until the horrible echoing noise cut off and echoed still in the cavernous down ramp. And was standing over him, glasses gone, blood-red eyes like a swamp toad, one slit pupil of a strange design staring daggers at him and boiling with a ruddy light. En's voice and smile was colder than the Xenon in winter. I could kill you here and now, boil the blood in your veins, boy, but I want my money. Let's go. Shaky, stumbling, and grabbed the back of his shirt and dragged him back down the ramp, Arjun staring without a care in the world. If you are quite finished? Naruto glared at Arjun through the pane. Prick. For 10 more minutes after passing through the big, barred door Arjun and Naruto walked down and down, passing twists and turning corridors made from the same sandstone the rest of the building seemed to be produced from. A lot of the rooms seemed to be bedrooms of a sparse nature, or storage rooms with racks of wooden weapons, padded clothes on racks and mannequins, with servants that looked very different than Arjun roaming the corridors. A lot of dangerous-looking men, covered in scars and leather, and weapons seemed to be out and about, and Naruto had to wonder what the hell had gotten him into, and why he wasn't more freaked out by this. His life currently seemed on an endless track of despair and terrible events. Mifune dead, friends probably dead, the closest people in his life dead, and all in horrible ways. The best Naruto could say was that he wasn't dead yet. Another of the barred iron doors squatted in front of them, except this one could fit 2 wagons through side by side. The corridor had widened perceptibly, Naruto noticed, but could only think this was where their ultimate destination would be. His fate would be decided, he thought rather dramatically, by what happened here. The door opened and a wall of noise hit him. With some shoving, prodding, and heavy-handedness on the part of the 3 of them entered a box-like area of low walls from which Naruto, and Arjun could see down into the massive open-air arena. Cold chills crawled down his spine. What had he said? That's what I do. Sometimes those weapons are people. The realization hit him and Naruto swore at himself in his head about how stupid he was for not realizing. The man is selling me as a fighter to this Shintoraku. The wash of noise made even his thoughts difficult to discern, and rapidly shifting out of the way of rough-looking patrons clutching drinks and moving about the seating was all Naruto could contend with, let alone contemplate his future and a way out. Mentally, he relegated that task to future Naruto. Arjun spoke loudly, to be heard over the din of screams and shouts and laughter and raucous yelling, deftly weaving in and out of the crowd. There is a match now, but Master Toraku will see you and the boy after. He bid you sit here and watch. I'll return to fetch you afterwards. Arjun left them in a rather tight 2-person box seating area, roped off and tagged with a sign warning away those who weren't supposed to be there, and settled himself comfortably and dragged Naruto down with a startled yelp into the seat next to him. Where's Chino? Does she know her dad is a gigantic prick and scumbag? And seemed to ignore him, staring down the 10-foot drop into the wide sandy arena to whatever it was that was going on down there. Judging by the shouts, it was a very one-sided affair. Wary of being subjected to whatever horrifying technique it was that felt like it boiled his blood, Naruto decided to keep his silence for the moment. It didn't last long. This Shin guy doesn't know I can't use chakra, does he? And seemed like he was going to stay silent. But Naruto continued, hoping to open him up. Look, let's make a deal. I want to get to Konoha and definitely don't want to end up fighting for this guy, lots of money or no. I'm sure the Hokage would pay a bunch of money for. The Hokage? An looked sharply over at him over his diamond-shaped glasses. Why would she want you? Naruto was taken aback. He sensed that maybe caution was a good thing here. He could tell in some things, but leave out others? Enough maybe to make him reconsider this deal with the Gutter Master? When you found me. Naruto suddenly found it hard to spit his whole ordeal out. Memories flashed and tears stung the edges of his eyes. He blinked hard trying to clear them. Taza. Furu. Mifune. Master Auron. There was an attack on the 3 wolves in the Land of Iron. That's where I grew up. When you found me, Orochimaru had stabbed me and threw me into the Zenon. He wanted some orb thing. I don't know why. And made a strangled sound. Blue eyes met red as and took his glasses off. Why did Orochimaru, an infamous S-class nuke not just kill you as easily as crushing a bug and take what he wanted? Naruto made a noise. Frustration or disgust or exasperation, even he couldn't tell. You think I know? And was silent for a time. Naruto stared at some brown swirls in the wood grain of the box seat walls. They reminded him of the jutsu used to restrain Kurama down there in that hellscape of a cavern. He blinked and refocused on it. The man was quiet for longer than Naruto thought he could be. Whatever. This just strengthens my reasons. Perhaps you'll be safer here in the gutter than out on the streets. And shrugged and cocked his head. You know why I wanted to sell you to Shin regardless of the fact that you're crippled, as you say? Naruto cocked his head and was slow in responding, considering. He hadn't really any idea. Now he was curious. I dunno, trying to get one over on the guy? And laughed at that. No. Nobody gets one over on Shin. That guy is, well, let's just say nobody crosses the Guttermaster and lives. Twice as cunning as the snake sage and meaner than a river lizard in summer heat. No, it's not about getting one over. Naruto shrugged awkwardly, still bound. I give. You say you were stabbed by Orochimaru, yes? Yes. And I healed you after pulling you out of the Zenon, right? Yes. You didn't have a sword wound on you when I found you. Naruto stared. What? And nodded, satisfied. I wasn't aware you were stabbed by a sword when I found you. I found that out just now. But when I probed you and took samples with my chakra scalpels, the very next day, sometimes within hours, you were completely healed. Remarkable. And had seemed to relax as he spoke, using his hands as if excited by what he'd found. For all the guy was a gigantic scummy asshole, he wasn't a bad guy per se. Maybe he was just a big nerd for science. Who knows? Naruto mentally shook his head. Not a bad guy. What was he thinking? Asshole with a capital A. Well, fuck him for kidnapping me anyway. That does make him a bad guy, just not the worst he experienced in the last 24 hours. And didn't that say everything about his life currently? The most amazing thing is that damage to your tenketsu and chakra pathways eventually will be healed, though I suspect it'll be a decade in coming given how extensive it is, and the very nature of it is what is slowing down your healing of it. But it honestly would have killed absolutely 100% of people. Except, apparently you. And looked him up and down. My specialty is bloodline limits, and I'm convinced that you have one focused on healing. There are limits to yours, obviously, but it's enough that I think Shin will make a strong fighter out of you. Longevity in battle is important, and here far more so. Most gutter knives don't last more than a year of bouts. The ones who do last, well, they become legends on the underground fighting circuit. Naruto snorted, feeling lost, and not knowing what else to do. Who says I want to be a famous circuit fighter making other people money? I did. And you will. Be making me money, that is, when Shin buys you. The match in front of them was wrapping up, it seemed. Naruto looked down and noticed the only man standing had one side of his head shaved, steel gray and crisscrossed with scars. The man looked small from where Naruto sat. The other man was lying face down in a pool of rapidly expanding blood and missing a head. The shaved-head man had a wide-bladed odachi that looked more like an oar than a katana draped casually one-handed on his shoulder like it weighed nothing. Scar Guy was built like Master Auron but looked to be much, much taller. Like a statue carved from mountain stone. I pity the guy that fought him. Two workers in rough laborers' jerkins had come out, and were dragging the dead guy by his ankles across the sand towards a wide opening in the lower arena wall. The man was rotating facing the dwindling and, from the sounds of it, half were disappointed and half were celebrating wildly. His arms were outstretched and a shit-eating grin spread across his face. Naruto could see it and his white teeth from where he sat. He revised his opinion. The guy wasn't small, it was just the distance playing with his perception. Master Ishiro. It is a pleasure to have you in our establishment once again. It has been far too long. What could only have been the infamous Shintorika stepped into view with Arjun at his side, same detached, slightly imperious face on full display. Arjun face said that yes, it hadn't been long enough since the last time they'd seen Ishiro. And calmly faced Shin and bowed low. I see that Saraya has worked out well. Shin glanced down at his fighter who, Naruto now saw, had strode over to a wash and water station that had been set up for him and was sluicing the blood off his face, hands, and chest. Naruto, even from this far away, saw his tattoo, an ungodly huge ink replica of some maned lizard snake that wrapped his arms and chest. While he watched, muscles seemed to ripple under his skin as he moved and stretched, the tattoo moving with them. Naruto swallowed. That guy was a monster. Most now call him the Lightning Dragon, fast, powerful, and skilled with a blade. A name is good advertising, which is why I tattoo them with signature animals. But you are not here about your previous offering, are you? En smiled. No, I'm here for more business. En gestured to the bound blonde with one casual hand, as if he wasn't a person, but a good to be traded. Naruto tried to summon the feelings he'd felt earlier: anger, the hatred against En for taking advantage of him at his lowest, Naruto's gratitude at being saved by someone he thought was a good person. Anger at how much of an idiot he was for thinking so well of a stranger. Instead, Naruto just felt a feeling of loss that he couldn't put his finger on, like a piece of him had drifted away while he wasn't paying attention. He knew he needed to start thinking, start planning, to get himself out of the obvious hot water he was currently residing in, but he couldn't summon the energy. What did it matter? Arjun was a statue, but Shintoriku, clad in beautifully intricate robes of dark geometric designs that seemed to purposefully make him stand out in a crowd, walked up to Naruto and stood looming over him. Eyes like obsidian dissected and weighed him, seemed to see through him as if through a far-seeing lens. Those eyes belonged to insects, cold and inhuman and unfeeling. But the smile was all warmth that didn't reach those eyes. Shin snapped his fingers. A line of kids were led out, bedraggled and slumped like the dead, bound and linked by ropes to a few of the huge men Naruto had seen in passing in the corridor. One particular specimen of what had to be a kid, though that was hard to believe seeing his size, reminded Naruto of a mountain, roughly a head and shoulders taller than the Lightning Dragon. What did they feed that kid? Naruto himself often been mistaken for a girl with his longish blonde hair and delicate features. He preferred to call them rugged, but Furu and Tazo would just laugh at him and Mifune would tell him some bullshit about looks not being everything. Naruto would just be grumpy. Getting called pretty was not at all a compliment when one wanted to be a badass ninja. Judging by the considering look that man was giving the large newcomer, and the lionfish smile that followed, the bigger the kid, the better the competition, and that didn't seem like a good thing for the kid given that he didn't even seem to be paying attention. Naruto's attention snapped back to the man looming over him. Shin slowly walked forward until En let go of the rope and Naruto's back hit the low wall behind which lay a 10-foot drop to the sandy floor of the gutter. Shin seemed to be talking to En, not Naruto. But the man's eyes never left his. You know how this works, En. We must see what they can do, though I know your ability to spot talent is impeccable. I reserve the right to observe. A tool that breaks the first time you use it isn't worth paying for, wouldn't you agree? And grinned at Naruto over Shin's shoulder. What the hell are they dash? I agree. Shin shoved Naruto over the railing. He had about a half-second to digest the swooping sensation in his stomach, and the pain of a palm strike, before he reacted to his impending impact, kicking his feet off the edge of the arena and turning his body over to land in an awkward crouch, face down, hands still tied at the front. He couldn't balance properly tied and fell over into the dirt after he landed, scrambling back up and trying to ignore the heat in his face. The kids were looking at him, most with dead eyes, some openly sneering. The big one, the mountain, was following a flying bug with his eyes smiling. Something seemed off about him now that Naruto was close enough to see his face. Naruto gave them both, Shin and En, the one-finger salute, and clapped a palm to his face. Shin never shifted. Fuck you, En. I'm not playing your stupid games. And I don't give a shit who the hell this pervert is either, playing with a bunch of tied-up kids. Shin lost his enigmatic smile. And looked near fit to bursting. Shut the hell up, kid. You'll get yourself killed. Shin quirked an eyebrow at En with Arjun behind them looking apoplectic. A vein pulsed in his forehead. Naruto couldn't help but smile. Mifune said his ability to piss people off was a legendary ability in and of itself. Undo the bonds. One of the rough men nodded and barked a command at another one who unsheathed a belt knife and started to cut the kids free. Those kids didn't seem to understand what to do with themselves. Some just stood there, others tried to make a break for the entrance. The belt knife ended up in the kid's back and Naruto tried not to flinch. The big kid simply followed the bug from earlier and Naruto struggled not to goggle at him. Is this kid for real? Shin stepped up and cleared his throat. My name is Gutter Master Shin Toriku. This place, he gestured at the huge stands and empty seats, is the gutter. A place of glory, of triumph, of defeat, of skill and bravery and wealth. Wealth garnered from legendary fighters and fantastic battles. Naruto was eyeing the kids. Some seemed to rouse themselves at Shin's words, but most still stared at the dirt, beaten down in mind and body. He shivered. That was him a couple of hours ago. Was it still him? Was he still beaten? The gutter is also a place of death, blood, and eternal life. One hand pointed at the tattooed warrior flanking them. He now had his huge single-edged, slightly curved blade resting openly on one shoulder. Sarayu was crowned by the people. He is a king here. Out there, Shin invested the words with heavy scorn. Like anyone who thought life outside worth living was an idiot of epic proportions, he meant nothing to anyone, a common laborer who didn't pay his debts and got sent to prison. Here? Sarayu screamed now, startling everyone but the gutter master and N. The scream more resembled some wild beast than a man. Terrifying. Tendons stood out on his forearms, muscles bulged in his arms and neck, veins pulsed. The man grinned at the frightened sheep shying back from him at his scream. Here, the people revel in his presence, and he is given every comfort: women, gold, fine clothes and silks, a feather-down bed, and all the food he could ever want. In exchange, he kills. He kills like a beautiful poet who speaks prose to a lover. He is a painter that only uses one shade, red. Shin shouted that last word, deep pride in his fighter coloring it. Sarayu earned his keep, earned his kingship, earned the people's respect with every fight, every masterful battle against the odds. Shin was quiet. Every eye, even the men working for him, were not turned on the prisoner-turned-gladiator hopefuls, but instead were staring up at Shin in adoration. Damn. Guy is nuts. Who'd want to fight for a living like this? Caged like some animal and only brought out for people's entertainment? A small voice, one that spoke only the uncomfortable truth, spoke up. Isn't this what you wanted? Some version of it as a shinobi? Naruto protested internally, not listening to Shin's monologue. Shinobi life is different. They fight for a good cause. To make the world better. Not for honor, though. Honor was a samurai ideal. But you aren't a samurai, are you? Shut up. He tuned back and just in time to hear the final part of Shin's speech. Today you have an opportunity, no matter how you've come to me and to the gutter, to take the first steps towards greatness, to train under my auspices, to become the next Sarayu, or Glordring, or Nakamura Giantsbane, or Setamina the Death Whisper and have glory eternal. Everything you've ever wanted will be yours, when, if, you pass the training to become one of my legendary gutter knives. Everyone was silent, hanging on his words. The men began to back away towards the entrance, leaning against the walls. Money exchanged hands. The kids started eyeing each other speculatively. One started crying. The big kid, I gotta stop calling him big kid, just wandered like he had no idea that shit was about to go down. Naruto simply sat crouched like a frog on a lily pad. They don't really expect us to, what? Try out like this is some recreational kiddie league game? He went cold. Shin nodded to Sarayu. I don't think they want us to try out. They want us to kill each other. Sarayu smiled and cracked his neck side to side. The blade made a thunk as it hit the ground, carving a deep divot. Shin smiled too. It was not a nice smile. All you have to do is survive. Sarayu became a blur as he sprinted towards the nearest victims. They want us to survive him. Chapter 7, Gutter Knife. Still crouched from where he'd fallen, Naruto didn't even notice that the crowds had thinned and gone. Instead, he stared transfixed at yet another butchery, more helpless than he'd been the first time, unfolding in front of his eyes. In front of a crowd of dozens of people who stood still as statues, Sarayu practically sawed two kids in half who barely even stirred from where they stood, frozen in fear like livestock at the slaughter, top and bottom flying apart like a neatly cut sushi roll. That heavy single-edged blade went chop, chop. Sand absorbed the red liquid seeping from wounds that some time ago Naruto wouldn't have been so familiar with. Yet, limbs flew again as Sarayu kicked the second one off the end of his blade, like trash discarded out of a third-story window, different parts of them collapsing to the ground while Naruto stared, mesmerized by the fact he could see his reflection in the pool of scarlet spreading through the dirt. Flashes of the attack on iron paralyzed him. The tangy scent of blood, sickly sweet human meat stench, the screams of the kids who had reacted, 3 of them scrambling in different directions. All of it blended together in a noise that seemed to swell in his head like some orchestral piece reaching a crescendo. Naruto bit back a scream, but couldn't stop the chaos in his head. It was another voice, not the screams of the dead and dying, but the same one that had spoken as he had fallen into the Zenon River while fighting Orochimaru, if you could have called what he did fighting. She was speaking to him. The ball, orb, the prison, the thing had glowed, hadn't it, then gone dark right as he'd fallen? A feminine voice echoed with power in his head. My seeds butcher each other, and call it entertainment. Naruto imagined full, red lips curving. How barbaric. The world hasn't come very far since I fell asleep, has it? Echoing, the voice rang in his head like a struck bell, reaching inside him, flicking switches, his body and scalp tingling. They need a strong hand to guide them, to suppress their baser instincts. Animals need to be trained to be useful, after all. Suddenly, the voice was bloodthirsty and demanding. I demand you annihilate him, Seed! The voice cut through his panic and he realized he was breathing like he'd run a marathon. The screaming in his head was gone. Mifune and Taza had spoken of this moment, the moment he would witness death and things that made average moments in life unimportant. They claimed it was the worst thing imaginable. Naruto, very young, had scoffed and thought only of the glory of vanquishing a foe like in the stories, not of the aftermath, not of what death really meant. Mifune had been patient. When the battle sickness comes upon you as it does us all, just remember what we've taught you. Breath. In and out. Count while you do it. Naruto had rolled his eyes but followed their instructions just as he was doing now. 1 breath, 2 breath, 3 breath, 4 breath. With each number, he imagined a box in his mind's eye and he followed the lines, each point of the box a number, as the chaos continued around him. When he was calm, he couldn't help but focus on the fact that his internal voice wasn't female and this voice talking about seeds of all things, was a voice he'd heard before. Kurama had spoken to him once or twice, just like this, but he was gone now and he'd been, sounded male. The whole thing felt ridiculous. He couldn't afford to go crazy on top of everything else. There were more important things going on than voices in his head, so he refocused. Why do I have a voice in my head? But the voice was silent now, gone. He waited to see if it would speak. Hello? Most of the kids were down. The voice was a problem for future Naruto. One kid, larger than the others, with big ears, but considerably smaller in size than the mountainous boy, still huddled watching that stupid bug, was growling at Sarayu and dodging him by throwing a smaller child at the murderous gutter knife. Naruto watched the byplay as Sarayu was focused on someone other than him. So you throw your compatriots at me in hopes I'll be distracted, do you? The kid sneered. Hiding behind a big knife don't make you strong. I'd crush you without a sword. The lightning dragon laughed and stabbed his massive blade into the sandy ground where it quivered. Ears, as Naruto started calling the boy who'd spoken, faster than Naruto thought he was capable of moving, threw himself at Sarayu, 2 large hands outstretched in a grapple. The man just grinned and grabbed both of those wrists, twisting his body and hurling Ears a half-dozen feet to land in a crumpled heap against the outer wall where he just groaned. PFT. Turning, Sarayu spoke in a loud, carrying voice to Shin. This is the best crop you've got this year? Shin shrugged, smiling. Sarayu seemed to spot the tiny mountain of a boy in the next moment. Naruto didn't know why, but he urged the kid in his head to do something, to fight back. If anybody could, it would be the 7-foot-tall behemoth. Naruto named him Tiny in his head, and Tiny was actively doing nothing more than staring off into space and muttering, smiling slightly at things Naruto couldn't see. Crazy? Not all there, perhaps? Naruto had met more than one person who had several screws loose. At least he wasn't fucking around with bugs anymore. The first fist the size of a dinner plate took Tiny in the face, and the startled cry that escaped Tiny's mouth was that of a small child, not the immense giant of a man he looked like. Tiny curled up, a boulder in the middle of the arena, as Sarayu proceeded to beat the kid within an inch of his life. Booted feet made meaty thudding sounds along with the slapping of knuckles against flesh and bone going along with the wet splash of blood. Whimpers poured out of this kid, and Naruto watched, and wondered why the hell the kid wasn't doing something. Hey, knock it off! Naruto hadn't realized he'd stood up and shouted until he found Sarayu staring at him. He found that he was breathing like the bellows in a forge. What is wrong with me? That voice, the one that echoed with authority, pounded in his head. Annihilate him, Seed! He shoved it down, no time for falling apart. Naruto struggled to reconcile the idea of letting the kids dig their own graves and not rocking the boat, but Mifune's face was staring at him. Taza and Furu and his friends and Master Auron were judging him from where they lurked in his head, phantoms now, and he couldn't take their staring. Accusatory. Besides, that kind of cowardice hadn't ever been him, even when it wasn't cowardice, but just being smart. He told people he didn't have much use for common sense, and he proved that now. Mifune's words that he always threw in his face whenever he did anything retaliatory to the other kids he played with thundered through his head. Your actions speak loudly about who you want to be, so let us talk no more about what a good person is and be one, Naruto. I shouldn't have to have this conversation with you because character is what you do when no one is watching. That was usually followed by Mifune marching him right back to make amends. Sarayu was in his face in an instant, and the block that Naruto threw up in response to the straight jab at his face surprised him more than it surprised the lightning dragon. Even blocking the man's blow hurt. But Naruto was no stranger to pain. Not anymore. Time seemed to skip a beat as they sized each other up, Naruto's violet eyes meeting the almost black of Sarayu's. There was no way he was going to be able to match this juggernaut blow for blow, or even win necessarily. But as long as he wasn't beating on that poor defenseless idiot or chopping up any more kids, that was fine with him. Naruto blocked the second blow, a shockingly poor attempt at a grapple. Naruto backpedaled using his open hands to redirect the shots away from his midline as Mifune had taught him, not directly confronting the heavy blows, turning them instead, but the next hit broke through, smashing him in the chest. Pain radiated outward from a spiral around the impact on his sternum, and he found himself moving, then blinking up at the hundreds of lights hanging from strings across the ceiling of the arena. Some forgotten instinct, newly rediscovered, told him to roll. He barely got out of the way of a fist that sent dirt flying into his face as he jerked his head to the side and threw his body into a sideways roll and then into a scramble that saw him on his feet and backing towards a weapon rack against the far wall of the gutter. Sarayu was crouched with one dirt-covered fist in a small hole in the ground where Naruto's head had been. No chakra, I'm still exhausted from everything. This guy has been fighting non-stop and is at the top of his game. And I'm also probably a third his age and less than half his size. That impact crater was more than brute strength. I thought the gutter didn't allow chakra usage? Naruto swallowed as he assessed his chances. They were not good. But Shin said survive. So perhaps this was just a test of endurance against long odds? Sarayu was in his face swinging. Naruto blanked his mind and reacted. The first 3 or 4 exchanges were fine, wincing with each one that made painful welts on his wrists and arms, ducking under a haymaker that would have taken his head off. But the blows suddenly got faster. Naruto struggled to keep up, but 1, then 2, then 3 broke through. The first took him in the shoulder, spinning him. The next took him in the side, breaking a rib. He knew it was the ribs because he suddenly had a hard time breathing without pain. And the last saw him again on his back staring up at the ceiling, swelling over his eye making it hard to see. Those string lights taunted him, twinkling. Fuck. Naruto heard the man walking towards him, heavy booted steps. The blonde felt eyes on him and turned his head from where he lay prone. The boy, tiny, more mountain than a kid, had bloody snot covering his nose, mouth, and chin, and he'd been crying, eyes bloodshot from burst vessels. Maybe it was the dregs of Shava Mifune went on about, scourging him like a flail, but it was that something in Tiny's gaze that made Naruto want to get up. Hope. So he got up. An age passed as he levered himself up, body one huge knot of agony, and watched Sarayu stalk towards him like some jungle cat. Naruto needed an edge. If this was a no-chakra contest with swords, he'd wager that he'd have a better shot at coming out on top, but this guy was definitely cheating and was using reinforcement techniques for sure. Also, his muscles had muscles. I need an edge. He didn't have time to think, a half-formed plan in his mind. Sarayu was just there. Naruto ducked, rolled, then lunged as fast as he could while bracing himself on the man's neck, whipping his knee out in a textbook knee bomb and slamming it into a cluster of nerves in the man's thigh. The impact vibrated his whole body as the man's muscles felt like hitting a goddamn tree. The goal was accomplished. Sarayu dipped to one knee with a grunt, sliding sideways on an unresponsive leg. Still, he attempted a lazy grapple with one swiping paw, but Naruto had already started disentangling himself in a backward handspring, sprinting away from him at top speed, which, given his lack of access to chakra and a definitely broken rib, was pitifully slow. More of a limping lope than anything. I need to get to the swords. A blow took him in the back of the head before he'd gotten 3/4 of the way there, stunning him. He fell, his body a menagerie of various aches and pains, the exhaustion of everything catching up with him. Sarayu pounded on him with chakra-enhanced punches. The sheer agony of breaking bones and tenderized flesh couldn't be anything other than that. Inside, Naruto felt something give way, a new kind of agony flooded his body. Naruto heard a rattle as one hand hit something, a stand maybe, and heavy items fell in a haphazard heap near him. Vision wavering, he didn't think the tattooed brute was focused on anything other than killing him. Naruto lashed out, gripping the leather-wrapped hilt of a long sword that had spilled onto the ground with the rest of the rack of weapons, and rolled himself and the blade around just in time to take the man's kick. Intended to stomp his face into a pulp, on the flat of the blade, which did exactly nothing to stop the sheer force. The blade rebounded away, smacking him in the chest with the mirror-polished steel, threatening to yank the hilt and his only means of safety right out of his hand. His whole body ached something fierce, a twinge in his leg, a dull ache in his side and face and knuckles, not to mention the dangerous something in his body that had broken from the earlier beating. I really gotta stop falling flat on my ass. He didn't give up though. There is no way I'm letting this guy kill me without a goddamn fight. He's got nothing on Orochimaru. Naruto snarled at Sarayu and swiped at him, the razor-edge tip missing the man's neck by inches, and flipped onto his feet. That almost sent him spiraling with vertigo, but he worked through it, launching into a set of swings designed to push Sarayu back. The man was wary. That was good. Blood dripped from Naruto's mouth and ears, and he swiped at the sticky liquid with a hand. The other held the hilt of his weapon steady, sword pointed at Sarayu's face. The man's face, unperturbed by the cold steel pointed at him, was set in a savage snarl. Naruto couldn't even process how fast the man moved, but suddenly his sword was flying out of a numb hand and a paw the size of a dinner plate was closing around his throat, squeezing. Spots danced and Naruto struggled to breathe. He beat and battered with weak fists, but without his chakra, he might as well be an infant fighting a full-grown grizzly bear. Naruto blacked out. He woke on the ground, again, to the sound of clapping and pleased noises from the box where Shin stood and En leaned on the railing. Sarayu was crouched, leaning over him, so close he could smell the fetid breath. Burning, his face felt hot from the slaps Sarayu had given him, full open-handed blows. Sarayu stood up and moved away, ignoring the blood and bodies of the people he'd killed and Tiny and Ear whom he'd humiliated. Naruto stared at Enoshiro, who was looking down at him from the stands with an unreadable glance and a slight smile. Prick. Shin had a speculative look, like he wasn't entirely sure what to make of what he'd seen. But the lights above were growing dimmer, washing across his vision like blurs. Naruto fell down a dark, dim hole with a rushing sound as he fell really unconscious. At least I'm not dead. And turned to Shin, who had already started giving orders to the staff that was still standing around on the edge of the arena. Shin's arena master, in charge of training and essentially running the place and its combat athletes, was a stern-faced older man with a tall topknot and shaved head, as well as a still impressive physique that still managed to be commanding. Yet the skin had started to sag over bulging muscles, speaking of a prime well past. The man's name was just Tanaka, and no one, except maybe Shin, knew where he'd come from or what he'd done before training Shin's fighters, but Shin wasn't about to say anything ill about the man who'd earned him his fortunes. Tanaka came up to the railing and looked down at the orderly chaos that had started, and watched idly as the blood was covered by a servant throwing dirt on it. Was the whole fight like that? It took a second to realize Tanaka was speaking to him. Like what? Sarayu, becoming frustrated by a little girl, and had to smirk. He doubted many people would have noticed, but Tanaka was sharp. The boy had pressed the gutter knife's newest champion to the point he stopped playing around. By no means a real challenge, but he hadn't been treated like a pushover at the end. That was noteworthy enough, clearly, to stand out in such an esteemed trainer's eyes. Naruto was 9. That was called potential. Tanaka definitely saw it, and had a good feeling about his upcoming negotiation. Would you want someone doing this to Chino? But ignored that voice as he always did. Nobody would ever do anything like that to Chino. Chino-ike was special. Unique. He'd make sure she was safe. Someone had failed Naruto, that much was clear, but it also wasn't up to N to fix every sob story that came his way. Sure. Keep telling yourself that. Tanaka was speaking quietly to Shin and tried to be quiet, to listen in, but the two were experts at conferring so no one heard them. Shin eyed N himself consideringly, and gestured to someone to drag the boy to the middle of the field, and suppressed a smile. Shin came over with Tanaka disappearing into the back stairwell he'd come from. No doubt to slaver over his prize. I take it you want him? Yes. I'll give you 50,000 ryo for Naruto, 2,500 for Yurichi. The rest, the big one, I don't care. Kill them for all I care. Inside, and tried not to let his greed show. 60,000 for Naruto, and I'll give you the other for free. How was it that Shin didn't seem to sweat at all? Bloody unnatural. And tried not to sweat while Shin eyed Naruto below, and then back at him. Eternity passed. Done. Shin gestured, and the two men in charge of the new trainees, wide burly men who worked for Tanaka, slapped Naruto to wake him up. All 3 kids were kneeling on the ground where a trainer had a hand on their shoulders, keeping them upright. One of the men took out a knife and walked towards the mountain of disappointment. He remembered when he found that child. Such a promising start until the boy opened his stupid mouth and said some nonsensical dumb shit. Still, this is the greatest payout of my life. Inwardly he thanked the boy for being such a gold mine. Perhaps I'll wait and see how he takes the good news. Naruto groggily opened his eyes to a kaleidoscope of pain. He was kneeling on the bloody sand, that much he could see out of his busted eye. That guy, Shin, was saying something. Looking around he noticed that Ears was still there, kneeling on the ground like him. Sarayu was gone, but there were 3 men holding on to him and Ears, and one had Tiny by the hair while another was approaching him with a knife. They're gonna kill him. The thought didn't really register until he heard what Shin was saying. Must really congratulate you two on a fine performance. Gutter knives are fighters to the core, and you both showed incredible promise that my trainers will hone and refine until you'll be the finest warriors in fire. You too? Tiny was. Naruto didn't even need to look to see the hilt of the sword where he dropped it. He didn't even think. So much had been happening that he felt like he was watching himself from above, an out-of-body experience. His near death, the slaughter of his family, being ripped away from everything, all of it made his world spin and tilt on a wild axis, and he couldn't figure out which way was up. But what he did know was that Tiny couldn't die, not after he'd saved him the first time and gotten himself beaten for his troubles. He had a sword and he could move. So he'd do something. I'm not going anywhere with that guy. Naruto pointed at Tiny. The man sent to kill Tiny had stopped advancing, the other had let his hair go, and Tiny dropped sniffling to the ground, curling up again. The Uzumaki felt movement behind him, air displacing in a lunge. Spinning, Naruto flicked his wrist up and out and felt more than saw the tip of his blade enter and exit the man's throat as he let the man fly by him in a textbook redirect of violent energy. The man flopped to the ground, dead, bleeding and jerking like a fish on the deck of a boat, throat neatly slit. Not on Sarayu's level, that was for sure. That was a bad idea on your part, friend. Naruto swallowed. The kill didn't even bother him, and that bothered him. Death was his new normal, apparently. I won't put up any more of a fight if you take my friend there with me. He can clean or carry stuff or just… I don't know. I'm sure you need strong people, right? But if you don't, I'll… What could he do to Shin? I'll kill myself. And, from where he stood next to Shin with hands death gripping the wooden railing, looked beside himself and raged. Good. And getting paid depends on my life. Naruto smiled, pleased with himself. Shin continued to study him quietly, a slight smile curving on his lips. Such passion and fire. Impertinent, but the greatest fighters always are, I find. Pause. Shin glanced at En, who was sweating. Very well. But I expect nothing less than perfection from you, for what I'm paying. You've also cost me a trainer, a debt you will work off, or I'll make sure you understand very clearly my displeasure. If you try to escape, you will wish you'd killed yourself here while you had the opportunity. Naruto shivered. The man was too calm, and that made it worse. It was a certainty like the sun rising in his eyes. No doubt. Do we understand each other? Yes. Do you find this agreeable? Was he really selling himself into slavery? Naruto took a moment to think, a moment he didn't need, but in his heart he knew he'd had no choice once he'd seen the naked vulnerability in Tiny's face, the agony he knew had been in Naruto's own heart before anger had put an iron barrier between him and his grief. Naruto knew that he'd make those same choices again and again. Stay and help, escape and leave these others to their fates. That was not who he was. Leaving wasn't an option. His life might be in shambles, but that didn't mean he couldn't do anything about someone else's life when he had that power. Remember the Shava, the dregs are what we cling to, no matter how small. No thinking needed at all. I accept. Shin smiled widely this time. Your friend will work the laundry and aid my smiths. If he does not or doesn't do a good job, he will be killed, and nothing you say or do will change that. You will also find out the depths a man can sink to in life. Yet you will be unable to kill yourself to escape degradation, the likes of which would break a shinobi. If this is acceptable, we will continue. Naruto stole a look at Tiny, who didn't look to be paying any attention at all, then managed a single nod. And whispered something to Shin, and Shin nodded once. Naruto was led up and he stood, watching as En made his way down to stand in front of him, looking down on him with a nose tilted in the air and a curl to his lips. Those sunglasses of his flashed in the fluorescent lighting. Naruto stared him down as he was led away in a single file line with the other two. Naruto almost stumbled into Tiny's wide back as the two of them were shown to their new rooms, if you could call the closets they were put in rooms. Sandstone walls, just like the rest of the place, framed a small space. The floor was dirty stone with beds jutting out of the walls on either side. Somewhat surprising was the fact they were actual mattresses. Shin did say they would get some of the finer things in life, but Naruto hadn't imagined that would start as a lowly trainee. The chamber pots weren't exactly high-end working toilets, however. Indoor plumbing wasn't exactly big on their list of priorities, he imagined. Yikes. The big kid, Tiny, just stood there looking lost. Naruto only hesitated for a second. My name's Naruto. What's yours? Kazan. Naruto waited for the family name, or was that his family name, and he didn't know his own name. Nothing was forthcoming, so instead he took stock of his wounds, most of them already feeling a little better, and that highlighted how uncomfortably aware he was of En's comments regarding his better-than-average healing. Despite that fact, Just standing and breathing felt like he was balanced over a bed of knives, and every time he relaxed one of them would dig into his lungs. So he sat. That wasn't much better. Now, it was just painful to crane his neck up to look at his behemoth of a roommate, and his lungs were killing him. Just Kazan, huh? The boy nodded vigorously. I think that bed, Naruto pointed at the one across from his. It barely looked like it would fit all of Kazan's bulk. Is yours? Kazan immediately sat and turned, laying down. Naruto saw the bruises on his eyes, arms, and chest through the open vest he wore. They were a deep purple already. He looked like he barely felt it. The whole situation just felt awkward. Kazan had his eyes squeezed shut. What a fucking mess. The door opened and Ishiro entered. Being the last person Naruto ever wanted to see, and seemed to sense that, and held up his hands likely to forestall an angry tirade. I know. But Chino and I gotta eat. Wordlessly, Naruto snarled. Oh, save it for someone who gives a shit, you prick. Why didn't even try to argue this? What was his goal here? He had to know Naruto wouldn't forgive him for treating him like a lab rat, and then selling him? Right. Look, whatever you may think, I don't mean you any ill will. Naruto just rolled his eyes. He couldn't help the noise that escaped his throat. And ducked out, looking both ways from their cell, eyes furtive. I know that you can't necessarily use your chakra right now. The blonde almost lunged at him but knew it wouldn't be good for Kazan, now that his fate was tied with Naruto's. But I've done a lot of thinking, and this issue of yours doesn't mean that you can't manipulate your chakra inside your body. Medical ninja do this in order to convert regular chakra into the healing variety we use, but we practice control almost exclusively in order to accomplish that. Normal shinobi don't do that, which is why controlling chakra that isn't pure yang inside your chakra network is almost impossible, really, without near-perfect control. Only extremely skilled shinobi and Irionin can do anything without hand seals. And squatted to look Naruto in the eye, who was very much paying attention now. Naruto literally had no idea what En was even talking about, yang chakra. Despite his less than stellar attention span, Naruto would have remembered hearing about a sixth elemental nature. Taza spoke at length about fire, wind, lightning, earth, and water, but never yang. That was less than important in light of what En was revealing to him. He could still use chakra somehow. He just had to figure out the trick. En rubbed his chin with one long finger, before shrugging. I've also heard there are, well, rumors and myths about other types of energy. I've put no stock in it myself, as I've never seen anything to back that up, but it's worth investigating. This 8 out of the clear blue made the blonde incredibly suspicious. Why are you, almost the worst person I can imagine, telling me this? And eyed Kazan, who was still sniffling and curled up, obviously dismissing him as a concern. Let's just say I don't necessarily feel guilty per se. Instead, we'll call this professional advice, since I told Shin I was going to assist my investment in recovering from his wounds. And stepped forward. Naruto leaned back. The man grinned. I've already done my worst to you, boy. Besides, I haven't gotten paid yet, so why would I hurt the merchandise? Reluctantly, he leaned back and motioned with one hand. And stepped forward again, and a green glow surrounded his hands as he laid them on Naruto's body. Waves of warmth spread through his body, centering on where he felt the most damage. Lungs, ribs, various bruises over half his body made a tapestry of colors that just looked painful. Naruto tried to memorize what the chakra swirling through his body felt like as it moved, and despite the fact it wasn't his, he did succeed, somewhat, in focusing on what it was doing. Beyond that, as he felt himself knit together, the bruises reduced in color and shape and size, he was completely lost. And had talked about actually moving the chakra in his body with his mind? Or something? Yeah, nothing useful. Grudgingly, very grudgingly, he thanked En. The man simply nodded. Naruto wouldn't miss those stupid glasses or his outrageous poncho outfit. Last 2 pieces of advice, and this is probably the most immediately important: you need an edge. All the other fighters can and do use chakra, subtly mined, with no overt jutsu. Reinforcement techniques are common. You need to be either better, faster, or stronger, and right now you have none of those things. Gee, thanks. Whatever. Lastly, don't ever let them figure out you can't use chakra. If you do, you'll be tortured then killed, Kazan will be outright killed, and then they'll hunt me down and kill me too for selling them a defective product. They'll probably make a wallet out of my skin. Those Yakuza hold quite the grudge. Naruto was opening his mouth, about to use that as leverage, when the door banged open, Kazan flinching at the noise. It was one of the trainers, rough breeches, plain shirt, and heavily scarred. He took one beady-eyed sweep of the room and barked at them. On your feet. Naruto stood. Kazan did not. In fact, he curled tighter into his ball. The man's mouth tightened and Naruto didn't need to see into the future to know what would happen. All of this would be a waste. Naruto felt a tug of responsibility and hated it. Crouching next to Kazan, Naruto whispered so that the man couldn't hear him. They were going to kill you, Kazan. I protected you and now I need you to follow my lead, okay? We have to do what they say for now. Just trust me. I won't let anything bad happen to you. I promise. But you gotta do what I tell ya. Yeah, big guy. Naruto held out his hand. Kazan opened his eyes. They were a startling green. Mifune had owned a fancy egg-shaped thing made of stone, jade maybe, that looked the same shade as Kazan's eyes. The egg had sat in his Gramps' study. Naruto had always wanted to play with it, but it was apparently super expensive. Naruto's hand convulsed. Kazan spoke, also in a whisper. For him at least. It echoed in the room. He winced. Okay, Ruto. Kazan's hand engulfed Naruto, and he almost yanked the blonde off his feet getting up. How much does Kazan actually weigh? The two of them passed an Ushiro going out, following the trainer down the hallway towards the noises of people talking over one another. Naruto felt En's eyes on him as they left. Time to face his new reality head-on. Naruto's hands tightened in Kazan's. The two boys didn't need to push much to get to the front of the small crowd of 20 or so boys in a semicircle facing the speaker. Probably a mess hall of some sort. There were tables and chairs, arranged for groups of 4 each, scattered around the room, and against the far back wall to his right was something of a dispensary, dark now, but clearly where the chow was doled out. Naruto suspected they wouldn't skimp on the meals. You can't starve your investments, could you? Naruto elbowed a lanky kid next to him and immediately regretted it, subtly wiping his elbow off on his pants. An acidic smell, sharp and tangy, wafted off of him. He smelled like an alleyway. Shadowed, bloodshot eyes peered at him. What? Naruto pointed. Who's that guy? Garbage Boy's eyes widened. He spoke in a fierce whisper, like Naruto was some poor dumb beast in a circus doing a trick. You stupid? That's the lion. Naruto continued looking at him. Was that supposed to answer my question? Cheeks colored, embarrassment or annoyance, Naruto couldn't tell. Tanaka the lion is the greatest fighter on the planet. He could turn an idiot like you and me into something worthwhile if we follow him. He trained Tsuryu, Glordring, and Setamina. The awe and worship in the boys were obvious. Those names rang a bell. Famous gutter knives. Naruto hadn't even known places like this. Places to watch men fight each other to the death existed before arriving in the care of an Ishiro. Iron didn't allow exhibition fights like this as it wasn't honorable. There was some sport or something played on ice with bladed shoes, but Naruto never had much interest. He wondered idly if this was something exclusive to the rest of the world, or just this particular city. People really wanted to watch fights. Come to think of it, how many of these kids actually wanted to be here? Naruto scanned the room and the vast majority of the kids were glued to the quiet Tanaka, seemingly collectively holding their breath. The man's presence was like water on a candle, dousing the chit-chat, focusing all eyes on his towering frame. One idea he'd had while and had talked was of staging a rebellion of sorts. Rallying all the kids, he had an image of himself breaking them all out, slaughtering the guards, and escaping to freedom. If all the kids wanted to be here, or even a large majority, that was going to be impossible. It might even mean he couldn't share his plan with anyone except Kazan. That would make everything much harder. But if this guy, This legendary trainer was such a good teacher, he might be able to take advantage of his skills and learn something that would help him escape. And did say he needed to find an edge. Naruto found himself leaning forward on the balls of his toes. Maybe this situation wasn't as bad as being within. Something might be waiting here for him to turn to his advantage. Most of you will be dead in a year. Dead silence. Kids, some as young as Naruto, shifted on their feet, clothes rustling. Poor. Rich. Trained. New. I don't give two shits where you came from, who trained you before you got to me, or how you arrived in the gutter. Only a select few will even make it through the first week. I don't put kids out if they can hack it. I will kill you and feed you to the dogs. You will disappear and your fellows won't wonder where you went, because that person is useless and therefore dead to me and the rest of the world. I will not hug you and tell you it is going to be okay if you struggle, because I hate liars and because I hate weakness, and that would make me both. Tanaka's dark eyes met Naruto's violet. This life is a gutter where life and death lay balanced on the edge of a blade so fine, so sharp, it will cut you to stare at it too long. Tanaka's eyes darted to a sandy-haired boy who wasn't paying attention, eyes on the food line. A hand as big as a winter ham lashed out, clamping around the throat, and squeezed. The sharp snap of cartilage cracking and a bone breaking echoed through the room. Tanaka looked like nothing more than a butcher carrying a scrawny dead chicken to the chopping block. Casually, the lion flung the boy like a rag doll. It was horrifying, even to Naruto, who had seen worse, the way the boy flopped in an awkward tangle against the wall of the mess hall. That was an investment of Shin's that he'd casually killed. A large sum of money just tossed down the drain because he wasn't paying enough attention. Naruto swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. Do you know why we call our champions knives? The question caught them all off guard. Naruto looked around, just like everyone else was doing. Ears spoke up, the boy from earlier who had fought Sarayu and lost horribly. We gone cut our enemies. Cut 'em and keep cut until they're dead and we won. Ears had a horrible smile. Naruto had known a few boys like him, who just liked to watch other people's pain. He'd have to watch out for him. Tanaka simply eyed him a minute before nodding. Crude. But that is one part of it, yes, Yuruchi. The other? So that was Ear's name. Nobody spoke up or raised their hand. Naruto found himself putting his up. Tanaka's eyes focused on him like a lighthouse beam. He nodded. Naruto was quiet as he spoke, remembering a conversation like this that he'd had with Mifune after a particularly bad kenjutsu session. Speed is life. Precision is life. The essence of knife fighting. Our focus has to be absolute, like the edge of a blade. Always ready to cut and keep cutting. The day we stop focusing, the day we lose track of our targets, is the day we die. Tanaka smiled and Naruto suddenly wished he hadn't said anything. Very good. It seems some of you can think. Good. My job is to train you, yes, but focus isn't something I can teach. Focus comes from within. My job, really, is to weed out the weak and unfocused. The trainers, Tanaka gestured at the men and women against the wall, will do their level best to push you well past your limit, to teach you the skills you'll need to kill, yes, but that is secondary to revealing what you're made of. Focus is what will determine whether you have limits. Those who succeed, I guarantee you'll become something magnificent with my help. That will be me. Until I leave. Difficult as it was, Naruto suppressed his unexpected thrill at the thought of impressing this man. Becoming a legend wasn't his goal here. Survival was, escape was. He had people to kill after all. Those who fail my process will be forgotten as they deserve. The man in red. Orochimaru. Two shinobi who would crush Tanaka like an ant under a boot heel. Yet, this might be a place to hone my skills. He needed an edge, maybe this would show him a way. Naruto couldn't ever forget the way Orochimaru handled him with kid gloves, utterly dismissive, broken like a twig so easily. Those who pass will be legends. After Tanaka left, another hour passed in the mess hall with the head trainer, Tanaka's left-hand man, going over their daily schedule. Wake-up was very, very early, followed by no doubt grueling exercises, most likely followed again by training of some kind for most of the rest of the day, broken up only by lunch and dinner and chores. The place needed to be cleaned, swept, food made, the trainer's laundry done, and 1,000 other tasks. Weekends were different due to the season's schedule of gutter fights. Those, they would be allowed to watch, for training purposes, and the older trainees further along in practice would be fighting in the exhibition bouts. Those were less lucrative than the main event matches, but there still were small real amounts exchanging hands. Kazan and Naruto were shuffled back to their beds, and while Kazan fell asleep fairly quickly, his snores monstrous in their sheer volume, Naruto stared at the ceiling till the wee hours of the morning thinking. Naruto had been doing a good deal of that since the betrayal. It seemed that he'd just fallen asleep before his door was slammed open and one of the trainers was hauling him out of his blanket roll by his shirt. Naruto hadn't bothered with the actual bedding, as that was one more thing to organize. Kazan sounded like a bleating sheep as a man half his height, but twice his width manhandled him like the child he really was. Hey! The backhand blow caught him completely unprepared and his head rang like a bell. A sneer crawled across the man's face. Your idiot buddy over there is going to the blacksmith for his chores, don't you worry. Maybe you should save the concern for the day you're about to have. Naruto couldn't muster any more fight as he was tossed around and into a hallway full of kids being herded out into the fighting ring, the whole thing looking like a school of salmon traveling upstream. Roughly, the now 19 kids were herded again into a single-file row of movement. A run Naruto could have done without an ounce of sweat with chakra, was 2 hours long with a thick log held in the crook of their elbows, and anyone who fell, dropped the log, or failed to keep pace was physically beaten by the more muscular trainers. An ancient stone-faced woman was called over after Tanaka determined the beating was sufficient, and she used the same green glowing Irionin techniques to put the kid back into fighting shape. Naruto hadn't stopped once or dropped the log, but the desire was there. Not too long ago, he'd been fished out of a frozen river after having been there who knows how long, stabbed, a freaking bijou ripped out of his stomach, and beaten multiple times within an inch of his life. But he never stopped. Not just his life was on the line now, no, the success of his revenge was too. Rage, a warmth in his belly like a blazing hearth, not chakra, gave his legs the stamina needed to continue and his arms the strength to hold that piece of wood that seemed to get heavier every minute his legs worked. After the run, which was apparently a warm-up, they were separated into different groups, one of which composed of trainees who seemed to already know some taijutsu, or combat in general, the others were brand new. There were only 2 newbies. Naruto imagined they wouldn't last long. Naruto found himself as the physically smallest of the kids in the trained group, yet he was almost at the top in terms of conditioning. The next smallest was almost half a foot taller and wider by a few inches, but couldn't keep the same fast pace as the blonde Uzumaki. He tried not to let the height difference bother him, but he'd been short and lithe for most of his life. Annoyance flashed through him, but he reminded himself that Yojimbo was also short, and it bothered him not at all. Well, when he was alive. Tanaka's demonstration of what happened when you lost focus had Naruto snapping to attention. That was the last thing he needed. Instructions to line up in 2 rows facing one another, spread fairly far apart, had the kids scrambling quickly and with little order. Naruto failed to find a partner, despite making it to a line, and ended up alone. That was bad. At least he'd gotten there quickly. The beefy guard, the one who had been none too gentle with his reprimand earlier this morning, quickly filled in the slot at a nod from Tanaka, who stood to one side, huge muscled arms folded across his broad chest. The guy, the trainer, had to be 6'1" at least, as Naruto only reached his mid-stomach. How the hell was he supposed to realistically fight this guy? Size mattered when chakra was taken out of the equation. He'd learned that very early. Eyes immediately jumped to Tanaka when he spoke. This is a submission fight. I need to see where each and every person's technical ability lies, and the best way to do that is to let you fight to the limits of your ability. I will be extremely displeased if any of you should be seriously injured. I will make that displeasure extremely clear and will only remind you of this once. This reminder will make the other one look like a leisurely Sunday stroll in the park. You will now say, "Yes, Master Tanaka," so I know you hear me. A chorus, almost as one, echoed through the empty stands. Control is extremely important. A knife cuts where Master Toriku wants, and he has made that desire very clear to me. Therefore, a knife that cannot cut where and when I want will be discarded. Naruto locked eyes with the guard. Somehow he didn't think the guard was under the same restrictions as the trainees. Naruto needed to step quickly. Begin. The next few weeks were a blur of running, a grueling weighted exercise that had him throwing up yet continuing anyway, extensive dusting of dust-covered rooms, late-night sweeping, weekly stretches of organizing the food pantry, non-stop weapons work, chakra-less taijutsu, and murderous beatings by that muscular guard who had it out for him. Naruto found out his name was Torin. Despite the grueling drills, murderous sparring, frequent beatings, and endless chores, the trainers gave the kids a huge amount of free time. That was a nice bonus. Regardless, Naruto's nights were consumed with spending time with Kazan, who apparently was a savant with artwork, which was quite a surprise. The boy couldn't string a coherent full sentence, but could accurately, from memory, and with photorealistic quality draw your face and everything around you at the time. No one but Naruto ever appreciated any of the things Kazan drew: a bird on their windowsill, overlooking a canal of some kind, or any of the action shots of Naruto getting his ass beat by Torin. Yomi even knew where Kazan got the pencils and paper from. Naruto tried to keep Kazan away from the other kids as Yuruchi, that was ears, seemed to have it out for Kazan. Naruto already had to make his displeasure clear once. Ears steered clear after that, even though Tanaka made Naruto howl for it. The lion had spoken loudly, between meaty blows that Naruto couldn't avoid, despite him trying. I don't care about petty differences settled out of the ring, but I do care when my fighter can hold a weapon for training. After that, Ears and Naruto simply stared at each other, and then attempted to ignore one another. It was difficult. Kazan was also extremely fond of sweets and hand games and sleeping, not necessarily in that order. More than once, Naruto found himself throwing rock and jank and knowing Kazan always threw scissors. Kazan never got frustrated at losing this way, he'd just look amazed and say, "Ruto good. Idiot." After a while, Naruto started throwing paper just to see Kazan smile, being the only person who did smile in this place. After a month, all of the trainees were given the run of the place. Not that there were very many trainees left from that batch. New ones were always coming in. The blonde was always paired with Torin, however, despite evening numbers. He didn't know what to make of that. But Tanaka would just nod and Torin would take his place. Recently, he'd started beating Torin with long swords, and every time that happened, submitting Torin was immensely satisfying. Tanaka would just stare at Torin and Torin would redouble his efforts. Naruto had to swallow his smile, lest Tanaka extend their training sessions. Nobody, not even Torin, could touch him now while he had a blade in his hands. Taijutsu was a decidedly different story. That was where Torin took his pound of flesh. But Naruto was getting faster, never fast enough or strong enough to win, but definitely faster. He still hadn't found the edge that An spoke of, so, at night, when Kazan was busy drawing in his art corner, a small corner of the room that he'd started accumulating supplies that had no function Naruto could see, he'd attempt to move the inert chakra he knew was lurking in his body. Sometimes he felt like it moved, sluggish molasses more like, but other times it would just sit there, inert. Other times, a flow would form when he wasn't thinking. That was the only way he could think about it, a circulation of warmth throughout his body. But as soon as he realized that aimless, purposeless chakra really was moving, it would go haywire and squeeze out of his light grip. The whole exercise was like wrestling fat, adrenaline-fueled pigs covered in grease, layered in spikes. Training made the days fly, and Naruto and Kazan both would look forward to breakfast, lunch, and dinner given how sparse food was otherwise. Kazan enjoyed his cleaning chores in the smithy, from what he could tell, and Naruto improbably, despite the brutal pace of sparring and drills and lifting those heavy-ass objects to build strength, not to mention the endless fighting with Torin, began to enjoy himself. None of the other kids, nor Torin, were remotely able to touch him when it came to weapons work, and even more recently, their version of taijutsu with the focus on striking, knees, elbows, knuckles, whatever you could throw. 2 months in and only 5 kids out of the original 20 were left. 1 from the new group and 4 from the trained group. The other kids had just disappeared one morning and weren't talked about, but each time it happened, everyone shared a look. The training was ramped up after every disappearance, but the determination and ferocity of the trainees went up as well. Naruto had learned his lesson hard when ears started up again, talking shit about Kazan, and the rage, a source of energy all its own that Naruto tapped into when he felt like quitting, now simmered beneath the surface at all times, easily provoked. The rage had reared up and he'd found himself strangling Ears with his bare hands after he'd said something about Naruto fucking Kazan. Ears weighed twice what he did, but it didn't matter, not to Naruto. The feral blonde had put Ears on the ground and in seconds the boy was purple in the face and a blood vessel in both eyes had popped, spilling red veins across the whites. Naruto had been careful to leave Ears fully functional. Nobody talked about Kazan. That kid was innocent incarnate, and nothing would touch that. Nothing. Naruto dropped him after Ears passed out. The boy walked quietly around Naruto after that, but he kept sharp eyes open. He was, after all, the next best fighter after Naruto himself. Tanaka hadn't said anything this time. Tanaka just looked like a speculative statue as he always did. Ears didn't want to say anything, let alone that someone less than half his size pushed his shit in. What followed was training, training and more training. Exercising until half dead. Chores. Hanging with Kazan. Trying not to lose to anyone in hand-to-hand or weapons. Rinse. Repeat. And had warned him, early on, but Naruto hadn't put any real effort into finding out a solution, and it kicked him in the ass. Chakra changed everything. Tanaka's salt and pepper hair was tied in a tall topknot, and it bobbed as he nodded. Every trainee, sweating and breathing hard, were kneeling on the sand of the gutter in a semicircle. Today's lesson will change how things work moving forward. Tanaka knelt, folding his hands in his lap, incongruously looking all the world like a monk in a monastery. At peace. What a joke. Tanaka gestured around him. The gutter is our temple. Violence, our religion. But like everything, there are rules to when, where, and how we apply violence. Chakra use is frowned upon, but not forbidden. Not everyone can access this power or has sufficient amounts to be truly useful, yet it is the patrons who are the lifeblood of the gutter, and they do not come to watch Shinobi fight with jutsu. Here, his eyes were razors, honing in on them and driving his point home. They do not want to be reminded of the godlike status ninja have above us all. That way lies envy, and envy leads to hate. Hateful people do not spend money to watch you fight. They want to see people like them fighting and winning. You must be the people's champion. Therefore, in the gutter, no jutsu or technique that is visible is allowed. Speed is something people understand. A fireball out of your mouth is not. Are we clear? Agreement in unison rang in a chorus from the trainees, Naruto among them. Naruto understood. People needed to relate to their champions. Your average civilian had more myths and legends about Shinobi than truth. But 2 guys fighting hand-to-hand? That made sense. You couldn't relate to someone who fired electricity out of their hand or covered themselves in fire. Fast was fast though, and it was believable. There was one other reason for this that Naruto thought Tanaka didn't want to speak of for want of looking weak. Shinobi frowned heavily on training ninja outside the hidden village system. This was tolerated precisely because most of these kids here had weak, or almost non-existent amounts of chakra. To change that, and invite true chakra-based combat, was to spit on the hidden villages. No one did that and lived. Tanaka cleared his throat. Therefore, reinforcement is the only technique you will be allowed to practice, and I expect you to perfect its use in combat with the same diligence you have thus far demonstrated. Is that understood? Another chorus of agreements. The dynamics of the trainees were about to shift. Naruto fought the urge to curse and squeeze his eyes shut. Yes, Naruto was faster than all of them, even Torin half the time, but that would count for shit now that all of them were encouraged to use chakra. Even a little chakra was a massive force multiplier, as Furu had stated once in a half-forgotten lecture. Chakra was a miracle power, and it would work its magic on even the lowliest of trainees. Naruto was about to be on the bottom of the totem pole, and the bottom meant imminent death. Today or next week, it was certain he'd be getting the axe. And was right. He needed an edge. The first fight against Torin using chakra resulted in Naruto not being able to see out of one eye and received a broken arm and sprained leg. But Tanaka did let him see the Irionin this time, and there had been a moment of panic when she swept through him with the green glow of what Naruto assumed was a diagnostic technique, and thought she'd out his secret to Tanaka and Master Shin. And had been able to tell what was wrong almost immediately. But she said nothing, just stared at him, briefly surprised. Then that look was wiped away so quickly Naruto thought he might have imagined it. Phew! The next morning, Naruto had stolen a white sheet from the laundry and fashioned a sling so that Tanaka didn't notice how fast his arm had healed. But there was no hiding, the bruises and sprain were gone, as well as the other. That would just encourage him to be more thorough or more frequent. A downside was that Naruto was forced to swing a sword with his non-dominant hand, and that led to even more humiliating losses to Torin. Chakra had changed things. Abject failure was what led Naruto to where he was now, wandering the corridors of what he was allowed to explore of the basement level of Shizumi Mansion, the real name for Shin Toriku's veritable palace over which the gutter resided. During gutter matches, the trainees were encouraged to show up and watch, but a few of the older ones liked to skip it and spend some quality time doing absolutely nothing. That was currently what Naruto was doing as well. He'd spent most of the night flat on his back from the strain of constantly losing. Torin and the other trainees absolutely tore him apart. Technique-wise, he was way ahead of everyone, but chakra wrenched the gulf in speed apart. 9 out of 10 fights had gone his way before this. Now he was lucky if he stepped quick and read his opponent like a book, he might scrape 2 wins out of 10. 0 against Torin and Ears. Surprise, surprise, Ears. Naruto deliberately went out of his way not to use his real name, was now the best of the trainees and had a ton of chakra to throw around. Naruto felt he had started to pick up on who had chakra and who didn't. Tanaka was displeased with this apparently unexpected turn of events, and it was obvious. Naruto did his level best to ignore the frowns directed his way when he lost. Hence why he was wandering near the forges now, lost in thought. Naruto very rarely had time to visit Kazan in the smithy, but apparently he'd unconsciously went in this direction. He knew he was close because the air temperature skyrocketed. Naruto pushed open the double doors and went into an empty smithy. The forge was relatively cold now, mere coals in the furnace, and the anvil was cleared of any projects. The room was dark with just the dull glow of banked goals and some lanterns worked into the walls. Naruto doubted the man was a farrier, as the advent of the autobus and autocar made horses almost obsolete for everyone but the very poor. Judging by the few weapons and armor on stands and hooks, the man didn't have very much work in that part, but there was a jumble of other items that Naruto couldn't identify, made out of steel and iron, set into a giant cubby. Against the far wall was an incredibly cluttered workbench. Master Auron would have had a heart attack. As always, his heart clenched at the thought of his former master, but he shook it off. Kazan, the person he came to see, was sweeping iron filings and discarded pieces of chafed metal into a dustpan. "Hey, Kaz." The big kid looked up at him from where he was hunched over working on sweeping some small speck up into the pan. "Hi, Rudo." Talkative guy. Naruto wondered why he'd even come to speak to Kaz. They progressed as friends to the point where they could be quiet together for hours, but Kaz wasn't someone he could really bounce ideas off of, only talk at. Kaz would just nod or shake his head depending on whether he actually understood what the hell Naruto was talking about. The Uzumaki walked to the workbench, swept his arm across it to clear a spot to sit, and hopped up on it, swinging his legs. He stared at nothing, just vaguely watching Kaz clean. The guy loved to clean, that was for sure. Not looking at him, Naruto started to talk. He felt like he owed Kaz an explanation. He'd promised him he'd keep him safe. So far, he'd done that, despite how much it had cost. There was a gulf between him and every other kid here. Normally, Naruto had no problems making friends, but he actively avoided getting close here. Winning up to this point hadn't really taken a lot of effort, but now, he fought with all he had and he was losing losing even to the worst among them, a skinny kid named Riji, who could barely hold a sword not 3 weeks ago. Slowly, but surely, Tanaka would have enough with his prized investments abject failure, and he'd be disposed of. Kez would most likely be killed, though maybe he was a good enough worker they'd let him stay. Naruto shook his head. Best not to count on Master Toriku's generosity. Kaz, I'm trying to fight as best I can, but Naruto swallowed. I'm handicapped, Kaz. I can't use my chakra. I'm useless. I can fight, but... His knuckles turned white, veins stood out on his hand and curled up his forearms. Naruto had noticed he was a bit taller in the last few weeks. Some muscles were starting to show, and he didn't look as girlish as he had. But he was still only 9. Or maybe 10 now? He had no idea what month it was now. None of the progress, mattered if he couldn't solve the main problem. How do you get faster when you have a hard limit? You gotta keep working hard. I hope they'll let you stay when they kill me. Kez loomed over him suddenly. Naruto flinched at how quickly Kez moved. Damn! When did Kez get so quick? Anger poured off him like a forge fire. No! What? No, kill, Ruto! Naruto watched Kez's hand tighten on the broom handle, and it snapped as easily as Tanaka snapped that scrawny kid's neck. Well, there's not much I can do. Kez cut his hand through the air like a knife. No! But... No! Kaz! Can you shut the fuck up? No! Ruto, live! Sour, Naruto rolled his eyes. I mean, the vote of confidence is nice. I wish I could just know over and over and have something be true. That'd be a shinobi power worth having. Kez was fishing around in his overlarge pockets for something. He pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper and peeled it apart like it was worth millions of ryo. The 8x11 piece of paper was covered entirely with a picture, done in vibrant color. Last night, they'd both watched a lightning storm through their tiny cell window. Purple and blue and white and yellow slashes of ferocious, thunderous lightning had rent the sky in crossways zigzags of color and furious motion. Naruto had stared at it, stared at the infinite power of nature, in awed silence. During his childhood, and he was painfully aware he was technically still in it, there were precious few times he'd ever seen the night sky like this, given that iron was predominantly underground. Master Auron had him do a similar delivery run to Master Lake, and he tried to beat a thunderstorm before it broke, but he'd ended up spending a night watching a blazing fireworks show of power, mesmerized by how bright the world was despite being late at night. Kez had drawn Naruto watching the lightning show, from a viewpoint behind him, and Naruto's face was slightly tilted. But Kez had drawn him like some noble hero in a storybook, a strong jawline, honed by food and exercise, and a perfectly symmetrical profile, framed by long, shaggy blonde hair with whisker marks on his cheeks, faded but still noticeable, all giving his face a wild cast. The Uzumaki colored faintly, uncomfortable with the obvious hero worship and the fact floating in his mind that Kazan reproduced what he saw perfectly, so if he looked like this, it was unabashedly him. There was something about the picture that tore at him, sparked something in his mind, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Naruto cleared his throat. Thanks, Kaz. This is great, I love it. But what does it have to do with not dying? Ruto hero. No kill. No scared. Think. Win. Naruto had turned this problem over and over in his mind, trying to match his abilities with solutions. Swords were all well and good. If he had one, he'd give 50-50 odds against an unarmed chakra user of low skill, but that wouldn't aid him in training. Might as well tie the person's arms behind their back as well. Fall. Next, his Uzumaki heritage granted him an absurd advantage using Fuin Jutsu, but he never practiced making new Fuin. Not only that, but Fuin required preparation, and he couldn't imagine they'd pause and let him scrawl some symbologies on their bodies to bind them or stop them, let alone lending him their chakra to activate it. So what good was that? Naruto picked up a random doodad on the table beside him and started fiddling with it as he thought. And had claimed there were potentially other sources of energy that one could tap into, but there was no possible way to research that or just suddenly discover something like that. Naruto snorted. That only happened in storybooks. Nobody just gained a power-up like that overnight without working for it. Hard work and preparation trumped luck every time, as Mifune liked to say. Fuinjutsu. Fuinjutsu. Every time he thought about it, there was almost nothing useful about it. Everything had to be written down, the medium had to be non-temporary, and the only real thing he made before was armor symbols that actively drew from a source. Nothing like that was going to be useful to someone who couldn't draw his chakra from his coils. That was the crux of the issue. He had to have chakra to use Fuinjutsu. Was there some way around that? And if there was, what would he even do with it? The only thing they'd allow is speed-based techniques, and Naruto had never come across anything that increased the speed of the user. Sure, the Onai armor system that the samurai used increased speed, but it didn't actually do anything by itself. Most people didn't get that. But all it did was increase the strength of the input chakra. So, basically, it was a helping hand but didn't do anything on its own. None of that would help him here given that he couldn't access his chakra. Ow! Naruto sucked his index finger. A point of blood was welling up where he pricked himself on the doodad he'd been playing with. What the hell? The doodad, or gizmo, or thingy, all very technical terms, looked very much like the needle gun that funsmiths used to carve symbologies for the Onai matrices into the steel of the armored suits. Instead, there was ink in a tub attached to the back of the needle. Naruto's index finger had a black dot embedded in it. Fuck, that hurt. Naruto dropped the needle gun on the table and shook his hand out. Maybe I shouldn't be messing around with things I don't know how to use properly. Kazan looked faintly disapproving at his curses. Oh, piss off, Kaz. Despite the fact he wasn't any closer to solving his issue, the picture had cheered him up and Kazan was a better friend than he deserved. It was obvious the boy trusted him to get them both out of this situation, so he couldn't close the book on them just yet. That much was obvious. So he needed to buckle down and just, train harder. Naruto sighed. So, from now on, he trained twice as hard and make up for the lack of speed with even more skill. He smiled at Kazan and took the picture from the dinner plate-sized hands gently. Thanks, buddy. Let's grab dinner, yeah? Naruto. Trying to keep smiling, Naruto vowed he wouldn't let his buddy down no matter what. Naruto held the door open for Kaz as the boy finished putting things away like they were made of glass. No matter what, he'd keep Kaz safe. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way to even the playing field that didn't require chakra.